All right, so check this out. Ethereum, the second largest cryptocurrency in the world, only behind Bitcoin, just hit its all-time high in price today. It's sitting right around $1,450 or $1,450. This is a big move. It's the biggest move in the market this week. It's what everyone's going to be talking about. And the first thing that investors are thinking, and analysts and traders, they're wondering how high can ETH go in 2021? You have some investors calling for $20,000. Some investors that I respect are targeting that level. And at the same time, you have Tyler Winklevoss, owner of the Gemini Exchange, Bitcoin billionaire, calling for something like $85,000 per ETH, saying ETH could be more valuable than digital gold, referring to Bitcoin.
So if Ether is your global computer in the future, what's that worth? It's got to be a ton, and it's got to be worth as much as digital gold, I would think, maybe more.
So on today's episode of the Profit Maximalist Show, I'm going to be looking at those ETH price targets and talking about which one maybe makes a little bit more sense, giving you a conservative estimate, a more aggressive estimate, and basing it off of how ETH has traded with Bitcoin in the past, because we all know that Bitcoin has blown right through its all-time high of $20,000, and it doubled shortly thereafter. I think you guys are really going to like this episode on the Profit Maximalist Show. I talk about trade ideas, market movers, the biggest trends, have on hedge funds, VCs, to talk about the crypto market and how people are turning a profit. Thank you for stopping by. I'm going to give you a second to hit that subscribe button because we have these episodes coming out every single week. Go ahead. I'll give you a second, and I'll see you guys after the intro looking at how high ETH can go in 2021. So to dive into this analysis, let's pop on over to the ETH chart and take a look at the dollar all-time high. But remember, the Bitcoin price is important, and that's going to matter a lot when we talk about, is $20,000 per ETH possible? Is $70,000 or $80,000 per ETH, like Tyler Winklevoss said, possible? The Bitcoin chart is going to give us a lot of insight about where things can go, whether this still makes sense as a nice trade, as a nice investment. How will it look relative to Bitcoin? Let's take a look at the chart. And in all of its glory, after 3 years, ETH is back at this $1,400 all-time high dollar value. Right? It took almost 3 years for us to get back to this level. Some exchanges have it marked down at 1,400, some have it at 1,500, some have it at 1,300. It depends on the exchange you use, but regardless, I'm going to call this an all-time high. ETH has hit its all-time high value after 3 years. That all-time high was hit basically right around January of 2018, a perfect 3 years ago. But for people that have followed me and anyone that trades actively, you know what matters maybe even a little bit more than just the dollar pair, and it's the Bitcoin pair. And it's because most altcoins and really most crypto in general trade more in their Bitcoin pair. And when measuring whether or not an alt investment makes sense, if you're not investing in Bitcoin, you're looking at an altcoin. So you have to be looking at the price in Bitcoin terms. Should you actually be invested in ETH depending on how it's performing versus Bitcoin? And if you look at how ETH has done since that all-time high dollar value for ETH, which was way back here in January of 2018. This was the last time we hit $1,400. ETH is still actually down a massive amount. I mean, it has never gotten back to that level. In Bitcoin terms, it's almost down 60% versus Bitcoin in 3 years. So right now with ETH at its all-time high in dollar value, I actually think it maybe has a little bit more to do with Bitcoin being at its all-time high and much higher than its previous all-time high, right? Rising tide lifts all boats, and that's especially true for something like ETH. It happens in the entire alt market. When Bitcoin starts to do very well, you see altcoin dollar value rises. But you have to always consider, especially as we start evaluating whether or not $20,000 per ETH is possible, whether or not $80,000 per ETH is possible, you have to be looking at the Bitcoin price. And remember, this was the last time, back here in January or February of 2018, that ETH hit its dollar all-time high price. So with ETH now sitting at 0.038 is the current price, the all-time high in Bitcoin price was basically 0.1. It got up to almost 0.12, 0.15 at one point, still down 65% in Bitcoin terms. It wasn't until about 6 months ago or mid-2020, basically the start of 2020, that ETH has started to outperform Bitcoin again. you can see that it started to form this floor after we've had a downtrend for 2 or 3 years. Most investors move to Bitcoin. There's been a very clear narrative for Bitcoin as institutional investors jump in and can clearly see Bitcoin acting as a challenger to gold. It's the digital gold in many ways. As a store of value asset, it does everything gold can do, but much better. And as ETH and really the entire crypto asset market cap, everything but Bitcoin lost value, Bitcoin has been kind of lifting or rising that tide for every other asset. So with ETH starting to outperform Bitcoin at the same time, and once again, ETH outperforming Bitcoin over the past 6 months, at the same time that Bitcoin's going on a historic bull run, it's fair to say that everyone should be excited about ETH, right? ETH is still relatively close to its floor or to its all-time low. If I was to break the ETH Bitcoin chart into quarters or into halves or into thirds, however you want to kind of mark it, right, we're very close to the all-time low. This is probably the bottom third of this chart. I'm going to make this red. You have kind of the middle third of the chart for ETH Bitcoin. And then you have kind of the top of how high ETH is actually traded versus Bitcoin. We're still really low, right? ETH has barely started its run. And that's crazy to say with ETH at its all-time high. But this chart is going to matter a ton when I start to look at Raoul Paul's call, $20,000 per ETH. It's going to matter a ton when I start to evaluate whether or not Tyler Winklevoss could be correct in calling for $80,000 ETH. This ETH Bitcoin chart is what matters. Because like it or not, the Bitcoin price for altcoins is what matters. If you're looking at Bitcoin and you're looking at crypto as an investment, as an asset class, you have to always be wondering, is my money better put to work in Bitcoin or should I be invested in this altcoin? And for the past 6 months, on the back of the DeFi narrative, on the back of, I wouldn't even call it hype, on the back of the DeFi theme, usable products for ETH, right? We're actually seeing a use case emerge and value emerge. We are starting to see ETH now outperform for the past 6 months. So I'm going to come back to this chart because it's going to matter a lot when I start to talk about the validity, whether or not we can actually hit $20,000 ETH. I'm going to talk about this breakout, why I'm watching this level, and how you can play the trade, how I'm playing the trade at least, and how you can turn a profit on this. But first, let's take a look at these pretty wild price targets and understand, are they that wild, or is it possible $20,000 ETH this year, $80,000 ETH in the next few years? I'm going to get to that, and then we'll also break down this trade towards the end of the video. Raoul Paul, CEO of Real Vision Group, which is a research service for hedge funds and high net worth individuals with their investments, talks about a crypto bomb, and he's looking at that ETH $20,000 price target. And he leaked this on Twitter. And his call for $20,000 ETH is based on Metcalfe's law. And Metcalfe's law basically states that the value of a network is due to the amount of nodes supporting that network, or basically the amount of people. And he starts to say that ETH looks exactly like Bitcoin did as it rose from that 1K price level back 2016, 2017, as it moved all the way to 20K later in the year. So he starts by looking at the network value of Metcalfe's law. The exact same relationship holds true for market cap. He starts to show that chart. We also say the Bitcoin chart and how that kind of evolved. Everyone is familiar with the Bitcoin move from 1K to 20K. He starts to look at the ETH market cap growing faster than Bitcoin, not only in terms of price, but also in terms of the network health. Looking at things like the amount of active addresses, the price structure, all these different things talking about the trend and how Bitcoin went from 1 to 20K and how ETH could possibly do the exact same thing. Basically, you're relying on fractals here. So he talks about ETH potentially going to $20,000 this cycle, the exact same as Bitcoin last cycle, and that would put the ETH market cap much bigger than Bitcoin based on the supply. The one part that I don't really agree with on Raoul Paul is when he talks about Bitcoin equaling ETH. And the reason I say that is because it's an entirely different investment thesis for most investors. I invest in Bitcoin because it's going to be a digital gold, right? It has the potential to be the best store of value asset we've ever created in the world. Central banks all over are printing money. Most of them target an inflation number. In the US, they target about 2%. So the goal of the US dollar is to lose value by about 2% every single year. Bitcoin being sound money, being hard money, having that hard cap supply coded in can act as that store of value. And if there's more dollars chasing the same amount of assets, and if people are looking to store their wealth somewhere, if they know the dollar is going to lose value, Bitcoin makes sense. With ETH and the monetary policy still being sorted out, especially since it's not really trying to act as a digital gold, it's trying to be this computing network for the entire world, a decentralized computing network, I think the thesis is a little bit different. So he talks about Bitcoin equaling ETH. That's the only point I'm going to kind of look at and say, it doesn't make too much sense, at least for myself, and I know for a lot of other investors, the thesis is far different. But he does at least admit different assets, different ecosystems, same adoptions, same behavioral economics, same, but different. His whole thesis is based on Metcalfe's law. And the fact that Bitcoin grew from 1K to 20K and that the health of the network, the growth of the network, the decentralization, the amount of miners and individuals supporting that network grew up from 1K to 20K, and that ETH is following almost the exact same trajectory in terms of network growth and also in terms of price and market cap growth. And that means the $20,000 ETH is based on or predicated on ETH network growing just as fast as Bitcoin's did, and that the market cap and price will follow a very similar trajectory. Trust me, I'm going to break down whether or not that makes sense and also whether or not the trade makes sense. But first, let's look at Tyler Winklevoss's math and let's see how he comes up with $80,000 ETH, because the number sounds insane. But let's look at his math and see if it checks out. And that math is based on ETH potentially being worth more than Bitcoin as digital gold. The math for digital gold is quite clear. If you look at Bitcoin's market cap sitting right around 500 billion or less than $1 trillion market cap, and you look at gold's market cap of $9 trillion, a lot of that money, sure, some of it's used for jewelry, but most of the reasons that central banks, investors, high net worth individuals, hedge funds, pension funds, the reason that they hold gold is as a store of value. It's been a store of value asset for thousands of years, and it's because it's very hard to increase that supply or that inventory of gold. There's a set stock to flow number of how much gold hits the market versus how much is available in the world each year. And the thesis for most Bitcoin investors is that Bitcoin is going to eat into that gold market cap, right? Bitcoin in many ways has the properties to be much better than gold. It's more portable, divisible. The supply is actually known. There's a transaction layer, which is much more valuable and useful than something like gold. So the math to get to $9 trillion or $10 trillion market cap for Bitcoin is pretty easy, right? It's easy to come up with that $400,000, $500,000 price target that used to sound ridiculous when you would say it in the past. But that's a number that JP Morgan and Citibank and Guggenheim, the biggest investors in the world, are all set on. And the clip that I showed at the very beginning of this Profit Maximalist episode was Tyler Winklevoss saying if digital gold, Bitcoin, can be worth that much, if it can be worth $400,000 to $500,000 per coin as it challenges gold market cap and as it gets as high as gold's market cap, if it's a better store of value asset, well, it's pretty easy to come up with the conclusion that Bitcoin could reach 400, 500K. And his point is if ETH succeeds as being a decentralized network, this decentralized world computer, where all of the functions of traditional finance, whether it's banks, whether it's lending, whether it's decentralized assets or exchanges, if all that is going to be built on Ethereum, if that's how we transact value and bank and interact with each other, if that's how assets and money interact with each other in the future, if digital gold just as a store of value can be worth more than analog gold or normal gold, well, then the decentralized network or the decentralized computer of ETH, where all the infrastructure for this decentralized finance is going to run, he makes a case that that could be even bigger. So if you start to look at a $10 trillion market cap for something like ETH, and you look at the supply, what the amount would be per coin, that is how he comes up with $80,000 per ETH. Now I'm going to fact check both these. We're going to look at the chart and see how much would ETH be worth if it actually does continue to outperform Bitcoin. Let's say the network does continue to grow, and we're going to look at how much one ETH would be worth if it does get back to its all-time high in Bitcoin price, based on Bitcoin being 40,000 or 30,000. I'm going to be able to give you guys a pretty conservative estimate, more aggressive estimate, and that'll help you evaluate, is this still a good trade? Is this something I'm going to hold on to? Because look, we have it easy. Bitcoin's already broken its all-time high, and we saw what Bitcoin did. Maybe the writing's on the wall that ETH can start to do the same thing as it does break this all-time high level. Does it go into price discovery, and how high does that put the dollar value of one ETH coin? And this is where the analysis gets kind of fun, because if you look at ETH in dollar terms, that $1,500, $1,400 price target, as ETH breaches this level, we don't have any resistances. And whether or not you think technical analysis is viable, it is helpful for looking at where buyers have initiated as support, or where they're stacking their bids or where they're stacking their buys, where historically that's been a good buy level versus where investors are usually selling. And for ETH, as we enter price discovery, as we start to move above $1,400, $1,500, well, there's not too many levels to go off of because we've never been this high. So I think the best guide for history and whether or not we determine whether or not $20,000 price target is reasonable, that's about a 14 or 15x, or the $80,000 from Tyler Winklevoss is possible, that's about a 50x. You can't really look at the dollar chart, right? It's just not too helpful. We're in price discovery, and everyone knows from Bitcoin being a great guide, no one knows what happens in price discovery, right? It's a ton of buyers and sellers all around the world trying to determine the price of this new asset. So as we look at the ETH price in Bitcoin terms, we actually do have a really good guide. When things get very overheated, looking back at January or February of 2018, when ETH hit an all-time high in Bitcoin price, we can tell that that was the all-time high for ETH and priced in Bitcoin. And since Bitcoin's risen that much, that'd be a 2.5x for ETH in Bitcoin terms. This chart, I think, matters the most because it shows whether or not investors are actually choosing to allocate to ETH versus Bitcoin. So that ratio, I think, matters much more than the dollar value. And if you look at where we are on the ETH versus Bitcoin chart, this is the highest we've been in about 2 years, not 3 years like the dollar all-time high. This is a 2-year high, right? So as ETH approaches, the most critical level for me is right around 0.04. This is the level back in 2019 where ETH actually started to do well, faced resistance and continued selling off. And now for the past 6 months, as ETH has been outperforming Bitcoin, if ETH can start to get above 0.04 priced in Bitcoin, I think that really opens up the door for outperformance. And then you start to see ETH, if it can actually continue that momentum, does have about 2.5x to go in Bitcoin terms. So what will be the ETH dollar value if the ETH Bitcoin price actually gets back to its all-time high, right? Which is 2.5x higher. And just in case you can't keep up with the numbers, about a 2.5x increase in the ETH price in Bitcoin terms. Once again, this breakout of 0.04 is the most important for ETH. If ETH actually continues to outperform Bitcoin, and investors continue to allocate more capital to ETH than they are to Bitcoin, right? If that trend continues and ETH can get back to its all-time high in Bitcoin price, that's the most valuable metric or the most valuable variable for me to track. If we do start to get to the all-time high in Bitcoin terms, that's about a 2.5x from the dollar value for ETH, and that would put us right around $5,500 for ETH. That's just assuming that Bitcoin sits right around $37,000. And so in order to reach Raoul Pal's vision of seeing $20,000 per coin based on how fast the ETH network is growing, we'd not only have to see ETH start trading at its all-time high in Bitcoin price, you'd also have to see Bitcoin start to 2 or 3 or 4x in value. That'd put Bitcoin right around $120,000 per coin. It'd put ETH at its all-time high in Bitcoin price. And then you start to see ETH trading right in line with Raoul Pal's vision. To see ETH all the way at Tyler Winklevoss' vision at $80,000 per coin, you'd have to start to see Bitcoin much, much higher. You'd have to see it in the $400,000, $500,000 range. And I don't think that price target is viable for another 1 to 5 years. Now, who knows? Maybe this all speeds up and gets way overheated way quicker than I would have thought. No one knows what happens in a bull market. But if you're looking at this from a trading perspective, regardless of whether or not you think $20,000 price target is reasonable, regardless whether or not you think $80,000 price target is reasonable, if ETH gets back to its all-time high in Bitcoin price, the price will be sitting right around $5,000, which still represents a pretty insane trading opportunity. That's about a 2 to 3x. As a trader, you have to be evaluating these opportunities on a level-to-level basis. And the most important level for me as a trader, as I look at how ETH is trading versus Bitcoin, that's what most traders all around the world are looking at, they want to see ETH trade above 0.04. If it does start to close daily or weekly candles above the 0.04 level, then I definitely want to be long ETH. And that means you're not too late. I know you look at Bitcoin at $20,000 and it felt late for some people. Obviously, that turned into 2x. I know you look at ETH right now at $1,400, $1,500, and it seems ridiculous that price can be that high and that people are calling for $20,000, $80,000 price levels. But the important thing as a trader, Should your money be allocated to Bitcoin? Should it just be in dollars or stocks? Or should it be chasing these altcoins and things like ETH? You have to be looking at the price in Bitcoin terms. And that price, that line in the sand for me, that opens up a pretty nice trading opportunity of serious upside, riding that momentum, riding that trend, it all starts at 0.04 Bitcoin. That's the price of ETH. I need to see it trade higher than. That'd be a 2-year high for ETH versus Bitcoin. And if we get above that level, that's where the parabolic rise for ETH generally starts. So, hope you guys enjoyed this Profit Maximalist episode. Who knows if the $20,000 or $80,000 price target makes sense? But as a trader, you have to be looking at this level to level. Should I be invested in Bitcoin? Should I be invested in ETH? What has more upside this year? That 0.04 level, it's the line in the sand. And if ETH starts to trade above it, I'm going to shift more of my holdings towards ETH, expecting continued outperformance. So that's the trade for me. That's what I'm watching for ETH, and that's what I think is important for you to be watching for ETH as you evaluate throwing out all the $20,000, $80,000 price targets. How do I make money on this year? You have to be looking at that Bitcoin price. That is what determines whether or not ETH outperforms and whether or not I want to be invested in ETH versus Bitcoin versus dollars. That 0.04 level is the line in the sand. I appreciate you guys tuning in to the Profit Maximalist Show. Later this week, I have some crazy episodes. I'm speaking with two brothers, two investors who invested in the ETH ICO, how they see this playing out, what their investment thesis was back then, and new investments they're looking at because their return has been insane. We're also talking to a hedge fund manager who sees a pretty wild opportunity in the market, a chance to buy Bitcoin at almost a 50% discount, and I'll explain what that means. You guys have to subscribe because you want to catch these episodes. Appreciate you guys listening over there on iTunes and Spotify, and for all you watching on YouTube, thank you guys so much for tuning into the Profit Maximalist Show. We got crypto news, trends, trade ideas, market moves, everything happening. If you're a crypto trader, you're in the right spot. Thank you guys, and I'll see you soon.